Over the last few weeks, we've named something real. We've named the connection crisis, not as a personal failure, but as a lived experience that so many of us share. We've explored why so many of us reach for screens or substances, not because we're broken, but because we were never taught how to regulate ourselves from the inside out. And we started talking about a third path, state management through self. This episode is more personal. It's about how this work was initially forged, not as a concept, but as a necessity. I want to take you somewhere personal today, not because my story is the point, but because the connection crisis that we've been talking about isn't theoretical, and the work that I teach didn't come from theory either. It came from living inside the exact patterns that we've been naming, feeling disconnected, trying to manage pain from the outside, realizing awareness isn't enough, and eventually discovering that the only real way out is training a relationship with yourself that actually works. This is how that happened for me. I did not grow up in an environment that was saturated in a sense of peace, love, and joy. On the outside, things may have seemed normal, but behind closed doors, life was permeated by anger, conflict, resentment, pain, and a lot of suffering. As I approached my teenage years, I began noticing something with increasing clarity. The people around me were fundamentally unhappy, not just at home, but everywhere. Parents, teachers, adults that I was supposed to be learning from. They were disconnected, frustrated. They were flat. There was no passion, no inspiration. Something was clearly missing in their lives. And I remember feeling this quiet, stubborn insistence inside me. I want more than this. I was convinced that I could live in a sense of peace and serenity. I believed that unconditional love and a sense of fulfillment had to be real and was possible, not as a concept, but as a realized experience. The problem was I didn't know anyone who had achieved it, and I had no model for it. So I did the only thing that I knew how to do. I turned inward. I started an internal dialogue, searching for any clue that could help me. Over and over again, I asked myself, what is my purpose? Who am I? Why am I here? I didn't have the answers, but I had intention. And I put real emotion behind that intention. Looking back, that's where the whole arc began. Because the connection crisis isn't just out there. It's what happens when we don't know how to anchor in here. As soon as I was able, my best friend and I, we moved out of our parents' homes. We got an apartment with our girlfriends, and we thought that we were stepping into freedom finally. But our sense of freedom and excitement quickly morphed into something that we did not anticipate nor expect. Instead of focusing our energy on creating a better way to live, we used it to rebel against the old way. I was trying to find a solution by focusing on the problem, on everything that I didn't want to become. And I now know that approach is almost always going to create more of the same. My new world became chaotic, and it ended up being filled with even more suffering than the place that I had just come from. I worked a meaningless job by day, and then by night we partied hard. Before long, my inner world was flooded with the sense of hopelessness and ultimately despair. So I started numbing myself with drugs and alcohol to avoid the pain of my current circumstances and my choices that I was making at that time. And the cycle did what it always does. The more I numbed, the worse things got. My girlfriend cheated on me with one of my best friends, and my relationship with my best friend naturally blew up. And here was the brutal part. Even though I was aware of the patterns, even though I could see what I didn't want, awareness didn't give me the ability to change anything. That's one of the biggest lies that we're often sold. If you can just understand why you do what you do, then you're going to stop doing it. That was not my experience. In fact, my awareness almost felt like it accelerated the pain because I could see the cliff and I still couldn't stop walking toward it. That's the connection crisis in miniature. We can be smart, self-aware, insightful, and still be trapped because insight isn't the same as capacity. Eventually, I hit rock bottom, and an evening of partying began like any other, but this time I spiraled out of control. One night of heavy drinking and doing drugs turned into 3, and after 3 days and nights with no food or sleep, that turned into a disaster. I was watching a movie with friends when suddenly I saw a band of dancing bears appear, and I began cavorting and dancing with them around the living room. I was truly delighted in the moment, and nobody else was. At first, I couldn't understand why nobody else wanted to dance with the bears. Then I started noticing that everybody's face had these horrified looks on them. And I realized in that moment that I was hallucinating. I excused myself and I went to my room to get some sleep. I lay in my bed awake, and eventually I decided to get a glass of water. But when I tried to sit up, nothing happened. I couldn't move my body. Then I slowly became aware of the heartbeat just beneath my ear and the fact that it was slowing down. Moments later, I experienced the sensation of hovering above my own body, looking down at this motionless form that was laying on the bed. Then with a jolt, I was back in my body. And in that moment, I knew something beyond a shadow of a doubt. If I stayed in the life I was living, I was soon going to be dead. And I knew something else just as clearly. I hadn't come into this life to waste it in an alcohol and drug-induced haze. I had no intention of living a mundane and meaningless existence. I had a sense that I was meant for more. And so I said goodbye to what I thought was going to be a fairy tale existence out on my own, and ultimately I went back to my parents' basement. And that's where the real journey began. And this is important. That moment wasn't inspiring. It was actually very sobering. It was the moment that I realized that state management through substance wasn't a solution for me. It was a slow motion exit. I needed a different path. And there's another key element of my family life that I didn't realize was unusual until I had some distance from it. Violence was a part of the fabric of my family. I grew up with 2 half-brothers who were substantially older than I was. Our friendliest of interactions included a punch in the arm, whereas other interactions included regular beatings, being smothered and trapped, and on one memorable occasion, being hogtied with duct tape by one of my uncles. I don't harbor resentment toward any of them. They were simply playing out the patterns that they had learned. And so violence wasn't abstract in my life, it was cultural. In later years, my sister's estranged husband broke into her house and he shot himself in front of her. My cousin was murdered by his girlfriend and he was shot 5 times in the heart. I'm not sharing these details for shock value. I'm sharing them because when you've been close to events like these, you stop thinking of emotions as just feelings. You see what happens when inner instability goes untrained. You see what fear, despair, rage, and disassociation can do when they take the wheel. And you realize something most of us don't want to face. If we don't learn how to regulate what's happening inside us, it doesn't just affect us. It affects everyone around us, sometimes in ways that we can't undo. It becomes family legacy. And this is why I don't talk about regulation like it's a luxury. It's a foundation. It's fundamental. After my near-death experience, my wake-up call at 19 years old, I felt a pull to seek out teachers who could show me other ways of being. I set a vision to discover a sense of peace and fulfillment within myself, and I stayed open and alert along the way. And it's true. When the student is ready, the teacher truly does appear. I happened upon a best-selling author who was focused on healing modalities. I had a conversation with him, and he invited me to train with him, which I did for a little over a year. Then, one after another, I encountered experts and masters in disciplines ranging from psychology and neuroscience to martial arts and meditation. With each teacher, I didn't just learn ideas. I lived what I was learning. I lived what I was being taught. I found myself in temples and ashrams all over the world, in places that I never expected I'd be, studying ancient wisdom traditions, modern psychology, and cutting-edge neuroscience. And I began to see something that I hadn't seen in my earlier life. People who were anchored internally. People who could stay calm in intensity. People who could meet suffering without collapsing into it. People who could actually shift themselves. I studied with a spiritual mentor at an ashram in India, where I watched them guide people through evolutions that would eliminate deep, long-term suffering, sometimes in hours, and in rare cases, minutes. And I remember thinking, so this is real. Not theory, not motivation. A real internal shift that changes the baseline for good. One of the most pivotal influences in my journey was a mentor who was anchored in ancient wisdom traditions. And what they had taught me to do was the opposite of what we do today when we're in pain. They had me disconnect from the world in order to reconnect to myself. No television, the internet didn't exist at that time, no substances, and I cleaned up my diet. And then training began. Training my emotions, training my thought strategies, and training the nervous system. It wasn't dramatic, it was very practical. And for the first time in my life, I felt something that I didn't know was possible. Peace in and as myself. Not because life got perfect, but because I was learning how to work with what was happening inside me in real time without needing to outsource my stability. And that's the seed of the connection fix right there. When we don't know how to be with ourselves, we reach outward. When we learn how to be with ourselves, we stop needing the world to regulate us. I also deepened my study of martial arts, which I had began as a kid. I earned my black belt in Okinawan Kempo at age 14. In Los Angeles, I met a traditional master who taught me how to train my body as a warrior, not only through physical training, but deep internal practices to cultivate energy or chi. And then something interesting happened. Competition humbled me. I trained hard, I worked hard, I did everything that I knew to do, and yet I still kept hitting a ceiling. In practice at the dojo, I was unbeatable. Under pressure in competition, I'd choke every time. That challenge brought everything into focus for me. My problem wasn't skill, it was fear, pressure, emotional reactivity. And when I learned how to work with what was happening inside me, the fear, the pressure, the activation, everything changed. I was able to connect the dots on not only how to feel more peaceful and grounded within myself, but how to leverage that new skill that I developed to create actual results in the external world. That shift took me from struggling to becoming a 3-time world champion in a style called Harongdo. Not because I wanted it more, because I was regulated enough to access what I already had. That's when I understood something that most people never get taught. The inner game determines the outer results. As I continued to train and study, I began to see a pattern. Ancient wisdom traditions had consistent results. Modern science could explain why those results were possible. I was studying psychology, neuroplasticity, epigenetics, and I began to understand from a scientific standpoint what I was experiencing firsthand. And so I asked my teachers for permission to take what I had learned and create a new approach. I let go of ritual and dogma, and I kept only the core principles and actions that were effective at producing results. And then something surprising happened. As my inner state shifted, the people around me shifted as well, even my parents. My father stopped his consistent planing and actually began to enjoy his work, and my mother began to experience a true sense of contentment. Seeing those evolutions, I knew that I had found my life's work. So I started collecting data points from everything that I learned to create a reliable system of evolution. And I want to emphasize something. Radical transformation can truly be instantaneous, but mastery takes time. That's been true for me and has been true for the thousands of people that I've trained over the last 22 years. Over time, my psychologist mentor, Dr. Luanda Katzman-Steinberg, or Dr. Lou, began referring me some of her most challenging cases, clients who no longer were making any progress no matter what they tried. And in many cases, the methods that I provided, they sparked a breakthrough. It wasn't long before I had a thriving practice and I had over 60 clients in my books. My wait list grew to several hundred people at one point in time, and that's when the work began to scale. Not because I planned it, but because clients actually demanded it. As people experienced real change, they asked me to hold seminars so that their friends and their family members and their coworkers could learn the approach that they were learning from me. And so I began offering weekend intensives where I would work with as many people as I could at a time. Ultimately, the programs expanded, and over the last 22 years, I've taught an average of 35 programs a year, and to date, this work has served nearly 90,000 people. And this is the piece that I want you to feel in your bones. This didn't grow because I wanted to build something. It grew because the connection crisis is real and people were starving for a third path. Not more coping, not more outsourcing, not more fix me. Training that developed real skills, that produced outcomes. If you zoom out, you can see why this matters right now. When we don't know how to regulate our internal state, our mind spins, we lose self-trust, relationship becomes fragile, and repair becomes rare. Conflict becomes threatening, and loneliness becomes the baseline. Then we do what humans do. We reach. We reach for screens, substances, anything that can stabilize the inner chaos. But the heart of the connection crisis isn't technology. It isn't medicine and it isn't psychology. It's the loss of relationship with self. And the work that I teach exists for one reason: to rebuild that relationship in real time, in real life, so we don't have to outsource our stability, our clarity, or our sense of direction. This is why I say the most important relationship that we have is the relationship with ourselves. Because your emotions, mind, nervous system, and intuitional aspects comprise a matrix that shapes your inner experience. And your inner experience shapes everything else. How you show up under pressure, how you respond when you feel misunderstood, how quickly you recover after rupture, how much of yourself you bring into connection or you end up withholding. When you master your internal state, you master your world. But here's the part that most people don't expect. You don't actually discover the quality of your relationship with yourself in isolation. You discover it in relationship. Because relationship is where our inner training, or lack thereof it, gets exposed. Relationship is the ultimate proving ground for this work. Nowhere are we more triggered. Nowhere are we more reactive. Nowhere are our patterns more alive. With the people that we love, our nervous systems don't get to hide. Our emotional habits come online automatically. Our untrained responses surface, not because we want them to, but because they're conditioned. That's why so many people can feel regulated, insightful, and grounded on their own, and then feel completely destabilized inside a relationship. It's not because they're failing. It's because relationship applies pressure, and pressure reveals true capacity. This is also why the connection crisis shows up so clearly in our closest bonds. When we don't know how to regulate ourselves, we take things personally. We become defensive or withdrawn. Repair feels threatening, and conflict becomes something to survive rather than something to work through. Over time, connection erodes, not from lack of love, but from lack of skill. And that's where relationship stops being a source of nourishment and starts feeling like a source of exhaustion. This is the context from which my relationship alchemy curriculum emerged, not as a relationship program, but as a training ground. A place to take everything that I teach about emotional regulation, nervous system literacy, self-trust, and inner authority and apply it where it matters most. Because if you can stay connected there, if you can remain regulated in intimacy, disagreement, and repair, the rest of life gets easier, not harder. The Relationship Alchemy curriculum can be assessed in a few different forms. First, the book, Relationship Alchemy, a practical guide to getting along well with others. Second, the online masterclass. And finally, the in-person 2-day Relationship Alchemy Intensive. The Relationship Alchemy Intensive is actually happening March 28th through 29th, 2026 in Denver, Colorado. This is where we train this work in real time with real people inside real relational dynamics, under the kinds of pressure where patterns normally take over. If relationship has been the place where you feel the most triggered, the most confused, or the most disconnected, that doesn't mean that you're bad at relationships. It means relationship is asking you to build a deeper relationship with yourself. And this intensive is designed to teach you how. If you're ready to stop managing relationship through effort, explanation, or avoidance, and start meeting it with regulation, presence, and skill, Relationship Alchemy is a great next step for you. You'll find a link with more information below, and I'll be sharing more details and context in the coming weeks. We'll also begin exploring the 5 core elements of Relationship Alchemy: vision, needs, wants, and desires, expectations, boundaries, and communication. These are the building blocks of connection, and we'll take them one at a time, grounding each in real-life application. For now, thank you for spending this time with me and walking this arc. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to connecting with you again next week. By the way, if you haven't already done so, you can always subscribe to the Connection Fix newsletter at the link below.